All righty, we are live. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. It's going to be a little bit different today. My right hand, Greta Russo, is doing her NFL duties. Very proud of her, but she's going to be away. Today we have a special guest from IATA. And by the way, I'm Dr. Nelva Bryant. We have a special guest from IATA, and I'm sure you guys have heard. I talk about IATA, the International Air Transport Association. I talk about them all the time. And we've had folks on here to also discuss IATA issues. We had Tristan Bradfield here a couple months back. And today we have Maria, and make sure I say your name, and I'll say it again, and I'll get it right this time. It's Maria
Jitomirski.
Jitomirski. She is with us
you got it.
And is going to share more information about IATA with us today. Let me go ahead and introduce you, and then I'll introduce myself again to folks who that do know me or don't know me, but let me introduce you first, and then I'll go second. Maria Jitomirski brings over 10 years of expertise in aviation, specializing in standard setting, project management, and B2B marketing, and also marketing strategy. She began her career at the International Air Transport Association, IATA, where she was responsible for marketing initiatives within its commercial division, focusing on raising awareness of products and services available in the aviation industry. Maria later led the development of CEIV Live Animal Logistics Program, which definitely you've got to explain that to them. I think that's a great program. This initiative, born out of the call for greater standardization by airlines and other stakeholders in the air cargo supply chain. It addresses the need for consistency in processes, operations, and training related to the transport of live animal shipments by air. Currently, Maria is the manager of special cargo at IATA. She's also serving as part of the Live Animals and Perishables Board Secretariat, and the Perishable Board, that's LAPB. In this capacity, she leads standard setting activities for IATA Live Animal Regulations, LAR, the Perishable Cargo Regulation, which is PCR, the Temperature Control Regulations, which is TCR, and she works jointly with the LAPB, composed of IATA member airlines. Maria helps develop the global standards for the safe handling and transportation of live animals, perishables, and temperature control items, or healthcare items, with a focus on critical areas such as documentation, packaging, handling, and loading. Everyone, please welcome Maria Jitomirski with us today. And we, in the past, Maria, again, Greta's not here. We had a little clapper machine and everything. So everyone, please welcome Maria to our format today, our platform today. We thank you for having you.
Thanks for having me, Dr. Bryant. Thanks.
Yeah. And I am Dr. Nelva Bryant. I'm a veterinarian. I work in the airline industry. I'm on staff with Delta Airlines. I help review and revise the policies for animal transportation. I've started these WinPet flies. I started WinPet Fly actually because I noticed there was a need for pet-centric travel education for primarily for our pet owners, but I'm also seeing that there's other aspects of animal transportation that also needs additional information to help prepare animals for transportation. We've been doing Wet Pets Flies, actually these Facebook Lives, initially to, again, share stuff with pet owners, but now it's turned into me sharing or introducing other folks in the animal transportation industry that I think everyone needs to be aware of. So as I said before, I talk about IATA all the time. And I'm happy to have you here, Maria, to share information with us. Is there anything else? Maybe is there something that I missed in the introduction to you that you wanted to share with the audience?
No, I think that pretty much covers it. Like you said, I mean, I've been with IATA for a while now. Previously, I worked for a fast market consumer goods company, but due to my love for travel, when the opportunity arose to join IATA, I jumped on board. And yeah, like you mentioned, I've been here for quite some time now, working on live animal regulations among some other special cargo standards. Yeah.
I think it's great. I'm glad. It was very interesting to hear that you were responsible for the CEIV for the Live Animal Logistics Program. Can you explain a little bit to folks about what that is?
Yeah, so CIV is actually based on the IATA live animals regulations. So where the regulations basically apply the standards for the industry to follow, what CIV does is basically ensure that people are implementing the regulations. So some companies have the regulations and are familiar with its content, but it's really a program that goes above and beyond pure compliance, really ensuring that procedurally everything that is within the LAR is actually implemented within their internal procedures, essentially.
That's perfect. That's perfect. And benefits. How would that, okay, and again, I told you my right hand is not here. And what Greta would do was always ask questions from as far as being just a general pet owner or uh, shipper or something. So how, if an agency, or I don't know, if an airline or stakeholder is CEIV certified, what does that mean for my pet owner? How would they benefit from that?
For your pet owner, that means that your pet it basically ensures them that they're really being handled with the right diligence and the right care. They're following all of the comfort, safety, welfare requirements that are put out by the IATA standards. So they're making sure that the regulations are followed in terms of the container that your animal needs to travel in, the preparations leading up to that, the ground handling, the loading, unloading of your animal, everything leading up to your animal coming to the airport itself, getting prepared for travel, and then post travel, making sure that they're brought back into your hands in the same state that you left them in, essentially.
That's good. I mean, that's really good to know for them to understand that about that. But you know, one thing that I always mention quite often is that pet owners really don't know what to do, and there's not many resources to help them. A lot of times they go to Dr. Google, they just do a Google search, and it might say pet, how to prepare a pet, and they'll just tell you maybe logistically what you need to do for your pet, such as, the documentation if you're traveling domestically or internationally. They're told to get a health certificate, and then they know to do that. They'll do that. They'll get a crate. They're not really defined on telling them an IATA compliant crate, which is extremely important. And then book your and they go. And as far as what I see, pets are kind of almost treated as a tag along. The care and whatever is needed for your pet to get them prepared is not being done. But I do know that IATA does have a resource on your website. Could you tell more about that as far as what's
Yeah, of
available
course.
through IATA?
Definitely. So I'll touch a little bit on, I guess, the distinction between, your pets traveling with you in cabin, like you're mentioning, and your pets traveling with you in cargo. But like you said, Dr. Bryant, I think there's a bit of a lack of awareness.
Mm-hmm.
People do tend to resort to Google quite quickly just to get a brief understanding of what's required, and they kind of piece things together on their own. So there's some more that needs to be done in terms of awareness, in terms of promoting the information that does exist. It's just getting passengers to really understand where they can go seek it out, and where it is currently available. So indeed, on IATA, we have a page called the Traveler's Pet Corner. So if you go to iata.org/pets, I think it's at the bottom of the screen, you'll find information there about the steps you need to take when you're traveling with your pet in cabin, or if you need to give your pet into the into the belly hold of the aircraft,
Mm-hmm.
and as well as the container requirement one, which is the container requirements for pets traveling, whether it's in cabin or in cargo as well. So it really outlines what your container needs to look like in terms of size, materials, the ventilation that's needed, the food, the watering, everything that your pet needs, like I said, to meet its welfare requirements are outlined in
Mm-hmm.
that document, and all of that is available online. But first and foremost, there's also the airline policies. So before people actually start looking into how to prepare their pet, they first need to check whether the airline they're looking to travel with actually accepts pets, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
in cabin or in cargo. Not all airlines do. So that's really a first, let's say, critical step. Normally airlines do put up their policies on their website. So if you are planning a trip for yourself, for instance, you can do a quick Google search in terms of the airline you want to take, and already go on that airline's website to see whether they accept pets or not. And also a quick phone call sometimes to the airline will do the trick, just to double check, make sure they're actually taking pets on board for the specific route that you've chosen, because perhaps there's a better alternative that exists.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, and they should plan well in advance for these trips too, because depending on where you're going to, it can take a lot as far as, well, again, airline information finding out is quick and easy, but to complete some of these documentations that's needed to travel domestically or internationally, it can take sometimes a couple months to get it done. Now, imagine if you're going to from the U.S. to Australia, it can take a good, say, 6 to 8 months to complete all the documentation for your pet. So communicating with your veterinarian early on, making sure your pet is medically fit for air travel is also important. Then all those things come into play of getting prepared. But quick little, I just need a paperwork and everything. You're not going to be ready, and your pet won't be ready for your trip if you don't prepare properly. So it's very good that the Traveler's Pet Corner on IATA's website is actually a very good resource to get prepared.
Yeah.
Now, there's some other
And in
things
that,
I added. Go ahead.
Sorry, and on that page as well, there's also a guidance specifically for passengers where it outlines the steps almost one step at a time, let's say, because there is, like you were mentioning, there's also the question of pet eligibility. So
Mhm.
when it comes to documents, sometimes there's also documentation required to justify your pet's age, because not all pets, depending on their age, are able to travel in the first
Right.
place. So there's documentation related to that. And then, if I use COVID as an example, there were additional measures put into place when animals were traveling, and that tends to happen even today, where in some countries
Mhm.
there's quarantine that's required, and those are things that passengers should be aware of.
Oh, yeah.
And like I mentioned, in most cases they can find that out from the airline, but sometimes they need to contact their destination countries embassy, for instance, to understand the regulation around pet travel to
Excellent.
destination. And things like that. So yeah, there
Oh,
is
yeah.
there is quite a bit. It can get a little bit overwhelming, and unfortunately, that information is not always found in one spot.
Right.
So that's something I think that we strive towards helping the industry achieve, really helping kind of piece together all that information to make it as a one-stop shop, let's say.
Yeah. But yeah, it can be overwhelming for someone trying to travel. And the more you do it, the better, the easier it gets. But there's a lot of us
Yeah.
that don't travel that frequently with pets. So yeah, all I can say is if you're doing it, you really have to really get all the information together and really research it and make the best decision
And
for
be
your pet.
patient.
Showing here some places where folks can actually contact
Yep.
you as far as IATA. Um, Also, and just a thought as far as IATA, just a question. I mean, I know I review IATA. I actually, you know what? I was just talking to some coworkers a little bit before meeting today and saying how much I think the IATA LAR Live Animal Regulations Manual is so interesting. But then there's a lot of folks that don't. But then I said, you know what? It's probably almost the same as if someone did computer coding to me or physics, engineering stuff. You just went over my head. I cannot comprehend. And there's a lot of people that think the LAR is to that level where they can't comprehend it. But it is understandable. Actually, to me, it's straightforward. But I guess you have to have the mindset. I'll admit to it. So, but either way, I'm sure folks would probably wonder how did they come up with these regulations and policies? Um, in the United States, we have United States Department of Agriculture. They have the animal well under that we have the Animal Welfare Act regulations, and then in the U.S. we've got U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services. We got the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and they all have various regulations that intertwine. So,
Sure. Yeah.
how did this happen?
Yeah. So in the context of cargo, at least, because that's really what the IATA Live Animals regulations focuses on, we do have a component on in cabin, and that's something we're looking to expand on further as there are more and more pets traveling in cabin. But in the context of cargo, what we have essentially is a board that's nominated to work on behalf of the industry to standardize processes and procedures wherever it's possible. So they're nominated by it's a board consisting of IATA member airlines, and they work to consolidate policies, government regulations. So policies, I mean airline policies, for instance, to essentially establish some standards and harmony where they can. So different airlines, like I was mentioning, have different policies about size, weight, types of animals that they accept, and whatever other restrictions or allowances come with that. And the airlines get together and try to see, is there a standard that they can create for all airlines, which not only helps all airlines between each other have that visibility and work easier on a day-to-day basis because they all know that they're following the same procedure. They're doing things in a similar manner, which kind of helps to streamline the flow, but also makes it more easily understandable for passengers in the end. So all airline members, and that's about over 90% of the world's airlines actually are IATA members, and they are bound by the IATA law. So any airlines that do transport live animals who are IATA members have to actually respect the standards and regulations that are set out by the publication. And that applies to many countries as well. So it's actually part of many countries' legislation. So if you're shipping your animal to a certain country and they follow, they have the LAR as part of their legislation, they have to basically respect whatever's in that legislation. And the reason we do this, really, like I mentioned, I mean, we have new regulations that are developed every year. There's new developments in regulation by countries or airlines. It helps to address problems. So whenever there's incidents that occur, we kind of look back at the standards, see what can be amended, changed, or improved in the standards to help prevent future instances of that, and improving animal welfare at the end of the day. So we have on our board, we have an animal care team and an animal advisory group, which consists of different international organizations and vets as well, who sit in on these board meetings and basically advise us what to consider when it comes to animal welfare and what we should take into account when we're developing these standards.
No, that's good. No, I think it's extremely important. Thanks for sharing that as far as how it's all pulled together. I'm trying to think if there's another story. Someone recently, another story someone said to me, they don't understand. It says it was a special item. I think it was a container to transport aquatic fish, certain type of fish, and it had a canister inside it with, I guess, an oxygen canister. And they sent all the documentation to me, and I was reviewing it. And I was saying that, and it said that it was IATA approved. And then internally, I asked, are we able to transport these fish in this container? And the answer turned out to be, no, we don't. They said it doesn't agree. And the oxygen canister is considered almost like a dangerous good. So no, we can't do it. And shared that back with a shipper, and they were saying they don't understand why, because it said it was approved by IATA. And my response back to that was, IATA updates its regulations on a yearly basis. And it may have been approved many, many years ago, but as of now, it's not approved. And what can we do about it? So
yes, so it is important to go by the current edition. There are changes in different areas of the regulations on a yearly basis, but it is like you're mentioning, really important to have the current and latest edition of the law, because specifically for certain container requirements, there may have been changes, and that affects operations and the type of container that needs to be used and potentially amended slightly. So yeah, it's very important.
Yeah. Even, the interesting thing too, on the commercial market, you might see some, as far as the pet travel crates that are there, that will say, and this is why I want you to speak this, it will say that the crate is IATA compliant. And I can look at the crate and say, no, I know it isn't. I've seen a crate, it was a couple of years back, but I've seen a crate that had double doors on it, and it was saying it was IATA compliant and everything. And I was like, no, it's not. But didn't it say you guys don't endorse or anything like that, correct? As far as IATA?
Yeah, so we don't sell, endorse, promote any type of containers. We do put the standards together for it in terms of, as I was mentioning, requirements, so how it needs to be built, the materials, ventilation, the doors, what everything needs to look like. But we don't actually go ahead and endorse any manufacturer products. So we have the guidance available. People can come to us and get that guidance and bring it to a manufacturer to, sometimes people build the crates themselves. That's also possible. It's completely allowed. So the guidance is there for them to basically use to develop that by whatever means they wish to do so. But we don't actually go ahead and approve any crates that are out there. Yeah. And unfortunately, there is some wrongful information. Some crates, two things. Some crates, like you said, are IATA approved because they may have been approved at some stage based on a previous IATA edition. It is possible that there were some changes and they're just not compliant anymore. But in other instances, some people don't take all the regulations into account. So 4 doors and some ventilation is considered to be sufficient, and unfortunately, that's not always the case.
Yeah, very interesting. Very, very interesting. Well, we got another good question here. When can a pet is there issues as far as pets and travel? Actually, you know what? I want to bring up this topic too. In the U.S., and I don't know if it happened where you are in Geneva or in the country there, but this past in 2023, 2024, there were quite a few brachycephalic breeds, basically French bulldogs or pugs, that died while they were in cabin with their pet owners. So, you know, you got to be careful with them because of their breed. But in general, I mean, we can discuss that, but in general, when is it good for my pet to travel in cabin with me? Are there instances where they shouldn't travel with me? Are your thoughts on that?
So instances where they shouldn't travel normally shouldn't be accepted by the airline. So in most cases, if you're, well, in most cases, in all cases, if you're compliant with the IATA law, that should prevent the majority of risk, right? I mean, the pet policy is the permission to travel in cabin will depend on three things normally. So like I said, the airline policy, whether the airline, it's up to them really. IATA doesn't tell the airlines whether they need to or don't accept pets. That's completely their decision. The pet type. So a lot of airlines limit pets to cats and dogs, for instance, and then there's others for who, you know, rabbits, for instance, qualify as pets as well. So that depends, and again, that's part of the airline policy. And a lot of the time, the size. So not even the weight, but really the size. Because what we do in IATA for in cabin is based on, as I was mentioning, CR1, which is container requirement one. So if animals can travel in the same manner as they would in the hold, so basically in a container, then they would be allowed into the cabin. But in most cases, that container needs to be able to fit under your seat, which automatically excludes a lot of different, you know,
Right.
cats and dogs from being able to travel. Under the seat space is quite limited. So if they're able to fit into that container and still be able to, you know, sit properly, lie down in a comfortable position, and even move around a little bit, those are still the requirements that apply whether they're traveling in cabin or in cargo, right?
Right.
So as long as you're compliant with the law and the CR1 requirements, and the acceptance checks also are conducted properly by trained staff who know what to look for when you show up with your container, then there really should be no issue in terms of risk.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say just to add on, following what IATA states for traveling with a pet in cabin. Yes, you got to follow the airline policies. Not all pets, all types of household pets are allowed to travel in cabin. Some can define just dogs, cats, and these got to be small enough, as you said, to fit in the soft-sided carrier with dogs, cats, and sometimes household birds are allowed. Some other airlines might allow rabbits, but I can tell you for a fact, some I've had questions fairly recently, people asking to bring a pet snake on board. That's not going to be allowed for most airlines. Even rodents, so, you know, or guinea pigs or hamsters, that's not going to be allowed in cabin. So just be mindful of that. But again, check with the airline to see what they would allow as far as their in-cabin policies, pet transport policies. I would say as a veterinarian, I would just make sure also to say this, make sure your pets are healthy and fit enough for travel. As I mentioned earlier with the brachycephalic breeds, it's not that they're not healthy, it's just realize that they have a facial conformation that makes routine breathing a little bit difficult for them normally. If they snore and gasp for air normally, imagine what happens when they're stressed and now in a confined space with in a carrier bag with, you know, less ventilation. So it can now become a situation where it could be a medical crisis now because they already have difficulty breathing and you stress them, and now they're in a crisis situation with that. So I would say check with your veterinarian for breeds like that. Again, brachycephalic breeds could be pug, French bulldog, Shih Tzus, all those cute little ones with the snub little faces. Check with your veterinarian to make sure they're medically fit for travel and they won't have any problems during transport. And also just make sure they're medically, there's no underlying medical conditions that can get exacerbated during stress as far as being transported. But yeah.
And to that point, actually, so some airlines actually have a policy about traveling with brachycephalic breeds, snub-nosed pets during certain seasons, because when it gets too hot, they already have that slight restriction, let's say, and in addition to you know, heat waves and things like that, it just amplifies the problems that may potentially occur. So
Mhm.
there are airlines that have policies in place, and they have restrictions during certain times of the year for snub-nosed pets. So that's just another example of policy that is
Yeah,
put in place. They allow it the majority of the year, but they do have certain restrictions just to
yeah,
prevent any incidents.
yeah. As far as risk, I mean, I think there's risk in everything we do, to be
Of
honest
course,
with you.
yeah, sure.
We all take a risk with traveling by air, but overall, again, making sure your pet is medically fit for travel and following the guidelines of the airline policies, following IATA with the CR1s and the containment for them, I think will lower the risk of traveling. But again, they have to be prepared. The more prepared they are and you are for transport, the easier it is for everyone in reference to that.
Of
But
course. And people ask often, they ask, why there's these restrictions on pet size, for instance, and why they have to fit under the seat. Again, in airline policy dependent. But, at the end of the day, it's about the safety of everybody on board, right? It's the
right,
safety of the aircraft, it's the safety of the passengers, of your pets as well. In an instance where there might be an evacuation that's needed, measures need to be put in place so that everybody is able to leave the aircraft safely, and that includes your pets. So it's really put in place to make sure that everybody's safe and comfortable throughout the duration of the flight, but also in a case where an evacuation or something like that is needed, that everyone's able to do so
yeah,
comfortably.
yeah. That's perfect. I'm glad you said that. 'Cause a lot of times, I guess people ask questions or think of things, and I don't think they mean to. They're personalizing, but you have to realize it's about everybody on that aircraft
Of
and
course,
everything
yeah.
and safety, and stuff. Yeah. So I think following IATA really is going to ensure that your pet's comfort and well-being, their well-being is ensured is by following IATA because it has the regulations and policies in place with their well-being in mind and actually their welfare in mind. Your pet's comfort, I mean, that's going to be, again, making sure it's in the adequate size soft-sided carrier. I've seen a lot of folks that transport their pets in cabin in crates these dogs are actually too big to be inside these crates. I don't know what we're going to need to do to kind of stop those instances because comfort is not really taking it, and they're not thinking about their pet's comfort. They're just thinking they want to bring it with them,
Of
but
course,
is it
yeah.
comfortable for them?
I think you raise a really good point, because there's one thing about your actual container being compliant, but then your crate can be compliant and you can put a pet in that crate that is too big for the crate.
Right,
So then the compliance kind of goes out the window to
right,
some extent.
right.
And yeah, you do need to consider your pet. It depends on, I presume a lot of pets that are being brought in cabin are normally domestic flights, so they're not flights that are particularly long. But still, just like us, we want to be able to stand up and stretch and go for a walk around the aircraft. Your pet wants to not walk around the aircraft,
But you want
but
to
your pet
stretch
wants to be
and
able
turn
to
around.
get up. Exactly, wants to be able to turn around and just be comfortable, while it's under the seat. And you want to make sure that there's already a little more flexibility for containers that go under the seat. They're able to be non-rigid, so they don't have to be plastic or wooden, for instance. So they're non-rigid, but that means that they're more susceptible to being compressed as well, right? So you don't want to stuff an animal under the seat and compress its ventilation pathway, basically, and really make sure that's still properly set up for your pet to be able to breathe well, move around well, and everything. So it's one thing, container compliance, but it's another thing making sure that the pet you actually put into the
Right,
container ensures that it's still compliant. Yeah.
right. Honestly, that's a lot of people don't realize that. It's like it's compliant, but my pet is, you know, it can't move. It can't move
Yeah.
out. So the
Of
comfort
course.
does matter. And depending on how they're being transported. Now, in cabin, just for folks to know too, in cabin, the regulations are a little bit different than going by cargo. There's different regulations in place going by cargo, and also by cargo because actually it's in the custody of the airline. So if it's an airline's custody, and also it's regulated as far as comfort of the animal is actually really important. It's animal welfare regulation requirement. They must have ample space to stand up, turn about in the crate and everything when they're going by in the container going by cargo. In cabin, again, it's the regulations are there, but pet owners should be aware of their pet's comfort and everything in reference to that. So,
That's right.
yeah. Well, this is a question I know that Greta came up with. maybe you can talk on it and I can share a little bit. I know about it as well. What do you think about the procedures? Well, actually, you know what pet owners need to realize when you decide you want to book your pet for a flight, you've got to actually decide on how you want to transport it, number one, and just be aware that with whatever this method you take, in cabin or cargo, realize that the airlines are actually, if they have two sections where they do transport in cabin and cargo, but you know, there might be two different divisions that you have to contact in reference to how you're transporting them. And a lot of times folks do think it's one line and it goes everywhere. And it will work if you had maybe an airline that just had in-cabin transport or the airline that just had cargo transport. But if you have both, it's going to vary. But what are your thoughts on booking a pet for transporting in cabin?
Yeah, so hopefully when you do call that central line, they redirect you to cargo. That's
Yeah.
what I hope happens. But fair enough, you know, I mean, before I worked in the airline industry, I didn't really consider that there's a cargo department, right? Especially at the bottom of the aircraft I'm flying in. So that's something that, you know, you learn about as you go through it at least once with your pet by having to go through the process. But prior to that, you don't necessarily know. And indeed, I don't think that's clear, or at least not obvious to people necessarily.
Right.
I would say in general, the booking procedures is relatively the same. There's a couple of different elements, but you know, like I said, you have to check your airline policy. You can do that whether it's on the website or by calling them directly, just to find out first of all if they even do it in the first place. Check eligibility of your pet, and some of this, like I mentioned, could be found in the guidance for passengers. So if that link to the pets page is shared afterwards, the PDF can be found there, and it helps people go through the process really in a step-by-step manner. The IATA compliant container, and this I'm talking about pets specifically, really. Contacting the airline to actually book the space, and maybe this is where things differ, is that you don't always have to do this by yourself, right? So depending on how you're traveling, there are shippers available to help you with this. There are shippers who can find you the best route, the best container, or wherever you could find a proper container, who can do all the documentation component for you. So it really depends on how you want to go about the process, but particularly for cargo, if it starts to seem, you know, overwhelming and cumbersome, there's resources out there. There's companies essentially who can support you in the process. And I think one thing I would mention that is very important, and I'm not sure people know this, is that as much as we would love to, your pet doesn't always have to fly with you. And that's for your pet's comfort. So you can fly with your pet in the same plane, but you might be going somewhere where, you know, a connection or two are required, and that's not necessarily the best routing for your pet. You might want to put your pet on a different aircraft that goes directly to where they want to go, and your pet will already be at destination when you arrive there several hours later or the next day, and they will be boarded at the facility and be anxiously waiting for you to get there.
Right.
But I think that's something people don't know, because people stress about, you know, they want to fly somewhere and they see they have two connections and they worry about their pet having to go through that process, understandably so. But something to keep in mind, you can look for alternative routes, book your pet on one flight, and you take a different flight basically, and then meet your dog or cat at destination.
Yeah, that's perfect. Glad you brought that up. Definitely. Again, they don't have to travel with you. Also, the highlight, something else you mentioned, you can, the whole process can be stressful, but be aware there are pet shippers with the International Pet and Animal Transportation Association, also, and the Animal Transportation Association. So two separate organizations actually that have pet shippers that can assist you with this whole process. And of course, yes, it's a fee, but sometimes to take away that stress off of you and make sure your animal gets to its destination safely, if you have to pay someone to do it for you, especially imagine folks that are that maybe in the military or traveling, moving major moves for their jobs, that's one piece of stress that you don't have to worry about. And you know that everything will be in order as far as the container requirements, pet getting to the destination safely. Everything is scheduled for make sure they get there safely and comfortably. So just remember that.
Some airlines require it, actually. Some airlines, it's mandatory for some airlines, especially when you're booking your animal in cargo. They do require you to go through a shipper, because they also want to ensure for you that, you know, you don't show up with your pet and there's some, you know, import export permits or other missing. So they want you to go through that third party to really, you know, ensure that you're able to go through the process as smoothly as possible.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that, because again, I said all, you know, documentation wise, they will make sure everything is you've gotten all the information that's needed to transport your pet. Again, yes, to create the documentation, getting them all ready. Extremely important. And actually, again, some airlines do require it for international moves to ensure that everything is in order. So when the animal arrives for acceptance, they know everything is set for that pet to get to this destination safely. So it's very important because God forbid if you don't, and say you do it yourself and you forget something, you get there with a crate that does not comply with IATA, LAR, and then you're denied acceptance. And then you're like, I don't understand. Well, there's something that you are missing. And you can only actually look back and maybe and figure maybe you cut a corner here. And that's why it's being denied. I think it's sad, Maria, here in the US on the commercial market, a lot of times they'll say that, like as far as the crates, CR1s, they'll say that they're airline approved. And a lot of folks will think that, oh, well, if it's airline approved, then it's acceptable. And it's like, and that's unfortunately, I think it's like a marketing little thing. I remember talking to a colleague of mine saying, it's unfair. They shouldn't say that. They said, well, it's almost like let the buyer beware. I mean, they can market it any way they want to. And I guess in this instance, the airline will be the one to say, no, that's not acceptable. That doesn't meet IATA LAR. But for that pet owner, person traveling under all that stress and thinking they did everything they needed to do, that's the last thing they need to hear or experience during that time frame,
Yeah. I think, a lot of this, especially for the passengers, comes back to awareness. I think they're just not familiar. I think the information's not sufficiently circulated. So there's, some more awareness outreach exercises that need to be done, letting people know where they can find all this information. Even if it's just, even if just airline policy, I think some people don't even think necessarily to go on the airline website to see if there's just to highlight, airlines have a dedicated page to this normally. So they have a dedicated page for traveling with your pet. If they allow for it, they should have it. So, it's something that's easily accessible, but you have to know to go look for it. So that's something that that more attention needs to be brought to.
Yeah, definitely. And again, one great thing that I love about IATA, the container requirements for dogs and cats, CR1, folks always say, where do you find it? I know from work, I actually email it to a lot of folks. I just email a copy of it to folks. But what I love about IATA is that actually you can find the container requirement number 1 readily online.
Yep, it's available to the general public. It's on the pets page. I think, even if you Google it, you can find it probably the PDF as well. Just make sure you're referring to the latest edition of the law, because sometimes there's older versions that float around. But as long as you're following the version from the latest edition, then you can definitely easily find that online. But your best bet is really iata.org/pets. That's where the latest information is placed. CR1 is there, the guidance for passengers is there, and there's some additional information just about airline policy, country legislation, and things like that. And of course, there's a link to reach out to us if ever you have any particular question about the standards. Of course, we do sometimes get questions about, where can I book a ticket for my pet? And I think we do need to remind people we're not an enforcement mechanism as well. We work with the airlines to really deliver on standards that they need. We just help we support the standardization process, but we're not actually involved in their policy making. At the end of the day, the airlines do develop policies on their own based on, like I said, country legislation and other. We're just there to try to simplify that for the remainder of the industry as best as we can.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. So just as a thought, how often does, as far as the regulations, we're saying that it can change. How often are we really changing? Are the policies changing, say, for the container requirements for transporting pets? Is that kind of almost a yearly? I guess it depends. Or could you share information about that?
I mean, on pets specifically, maybe every couple of years. Like I said, it really depends on if there's new welfare requirements that come about, if certain countries want to develop legislation around welfare or other, then that's really what causes the revisions to be made. But in the LAR, it's not just about CR1, right? I mean, we have so many other container requirements for other animals. So changes come to other areas of the LAR, not necessarily CR1 only. But I would say every couple of years, it would be important for stakeholders to take a look and see if there's anything that has changed. But also to highlight, I mean, IATA law isn't necessarily for passengers. There's components of it that is super relevant for them, like CR1 and some guidance, but that information is always available on the public domain. But the publication itself is really more relevant to cargo operations. So it's for shippers, freight forwarders, airlines. Indeed, like you were mentioning at the beginning of the call, passengers may feel a little lost by it. It's a nice reference to have, but the information in there is not necessarily relevant to, your day-to-day passenger traveling with their pet. Yeah.
Definitely cargo code, because a regular person probably,
Yeah.
it's going in great detail, but it's a good manual for, like I say, other stakeholders, zoos that transport zoo animals.
Yeah.
It's needed in a lot of other sectors, but all related to animal transport by cargo, not
Of course.
everything.
Yeah.
Good. I'm trying to see what else that we have here. Questions. So what other information you think would be useful in considering traveling with your pet from your standpoint?
I think we covered quite a lot of things, but I think, getting familiarized with container requirement 1 is the go-to. There's a lot of information in there, I think, that people wouldn't think to look at or to know about in general, just even about measuring your pets and making sure that the container that you either build up or buy, that it's appropriate for the size of your animal. You do have to check the dimensions of their height, their width. You need to check all that to make sure that the whatever container you put together is actually suited for them. And like we were saying, so your dog doesn't end up in a container that's too small for it at the end of the day, even though the container is compliant per se. So I think there's a lot of things that passengers can learn just by reading that document. Yeah,
I think so too. I loved it. Thank you for bringing that up. That's one great thing that's in the IATA LAR CR number 1, and again, that's for dogs and cats. They have just a little diagram to help you measure your pet to ensure it's in the right size container. So important. You'd be amazed the number of people here. I'll just say I've seen a lot, Maria. I've seen people that will have pet crates, and I don't know if you've had dogs or not, but you get a puppy and you got a house train. So you get a crate, which we just think it's a crate, and they get house trained in it. And when they get a little bit older, of course, you don't need it any longer. So you put it in the garage or somewhere away, store it away, and then I got to travel, right? So you pull it back out, and then now you want to shove your now adult-sized dog into this container that it had maybe when it was maybe up to 6 months of age, and you're trying to shove them in there, and they think it's okay, because the crate number 1 on it, the crate may have said at one point that it was airline compliant, and it's fine, and they think it's fine. But it's not appropriate because it's not the appropriate size for your pet. So I love that the CR number 1 has a little diagram that just shows you how to measure your pet to ensure it's in the appropriate size crate. So I think that's perfect.
Very important point.
Yeah. Well, goodness gracious. I don't know if you have any other things to add or questions or anything else you want to bring up. Is anything further? I feel like we're cutting too short. Anything further you want to discuss?
I think we covered quite a few things.
I know we did.
Like I said, passengers can, if they have high level questions, particularly on CR1, they can always reach out to us. We can send them that information. I invite people really to check the Traveler's Pet Corner, just to get familiarized with that. There's a lot of resource out there to even check out, if you fly frequently with a certain airline, to check out their website, check the airline policy, and just learn a little bit more about the process. I think it puts everybody a little more at ease when they understand how everything works. I think there's a lot of assumptions sometimes that could be easily clarified once we just have that information on hand, right? So little by little, as you do it, don't stress too much. Take it one step at a time,
right?
And remember that there's there's resources and there's help out there as well, right? There's a lot of professionals that can help with the process. Airlines can answer a lot of questions as a starting point, and then there's shipping companies that can help with documentation and such. It is today a little bit all over the place, but hopefully more and more as there's larger volumes of pets being transported in cabin, especially. I think gradually we're all going to work towards kind of streamlining that and making that information more easily and readily available for passengers traveling with pets on a regular basis.
That's perfect. Yes, I appreciate it. Well, I thank you for being with us today and sharing more information about IATA and your role that you play with them. thank you. And I don't have anything further to say or discuss at this time. I miss Greta because I feel like we could have had more report. She's just good at, so I apologize. I feel like I'm more straight to the point today. So I apologize for that. But
That's great.
either way,
Well, I hope the
thank you for
information was
having me.
valuable. And again, if people
It
have any
was.
questions, we're here, and it was great to be able to share this information with everybody. So I appreciate the invitation. Thank you, Dr. Bryant.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, folks, we are going to close it off for today. Hold on for a few seconds, Maria, but this is the end of our session for today. Thank you again, Maria, for being with us from IATA. And if you have any further questions, please reach out to her or myself. And thank you all for joining us. Bye-bye.